You know, there is something about the setting in For Honor that I find rather weird, in the spirit of, let's just overanalyze things for the fun of it. Now, you have the three factions who have been at war for a long time, centuries, and apparently they haven't really changed in that time. I mean, all three are, you know, the stereotypical image of a Viking, including the ridiculous horns and knight and samurai, you know, vaguely inspired by history. It's really more the pop culture image of them, which of course was the entire idea. They just wanted to have, wouldn't it be cool if Vikings and knights and samurai, all the bunny ears, were fighting each other, and that's what that's all about. But at the same time, wouldn't it be interesting if they had taken it a step further and really, you know, gone with the whole idea of, okay, so this has been a long time, these factions have been fighting, and what does happen over time when warring factions remain in a conflict? Well, either one side just steamrolls the other and they have no chance and they are conquered and incorporated into that empire or whatever it is, faction, or they adopt different things to counteract whatever the other side has or uses and whatnot. I mean, there are plenty of examples of that in history. For example, during the First Punic War, the Carthaginian navy was far superior and the Romans had very little, if any, experience in naval warfare. So they kind of failed against the Carthaginian fleet at first, but then they came up with something that would play into their own strength. So it's a device called the corvus, a boarding device. So essentially, it is a bridge that, with a spike at the end, a bronze beak, that you would lower and then, you know, basically hook into the enemy ship to, you know, latch onto them, and then you can send your legionaries over to board the ship, which was much more advantageous for the Romans because that was what they were good at. Now, it wasn't the decisive factor in winning the war. I mean, it had some disadvantages, but it's one example where, you know, you meet somebody or something that is better equipped or somehow has an advantage. What do? Well, you adapt. And that has happened plenty of times. I mean, during the Middle Ages, there was this whole arms race, basically. Okay, so let's build stone castles. Well, screw that. Let's build bigger siege engines. Oh, we need bigger and thicker castle walls. Well, screw that. Here's cannon. So that sort of thing. And with armor as well. Okay, we need better armor. Oh, there's better armor. Let's come up with weapons to defeat that armor. What's up with the Vikings? Why do they just say, nope, screw it, we stick to our fur and leather? I mean, you would think they see the knights in particular and notice that, you know, it's pretty damn difficult to do any damage through all of this steel. So wouldn't it be neat if we had that? And, you know, lack of resources can't really be it, because clearly the knights have access to enough iron ore and have all the craftsmen and resources, etc., to, you know, be able to afford encasing themselves in steel. So there is clearly something somewhere. So eventually the other factions, like if the knights were the only ones who had access to those resources, eventually the other factions would figure that out and would try to raid, you know, those ore mines or kidnap craftsmen and figure out, okay, you teach us what you know or we're going to keep torturing you, that sort of thing. And they would eventually figure out how that's done, and they would try to get access. You know, basically the war could revolve around the resources in that case eventually, but they would still try to get that stuff. Also considering if either Vikings or samurai win a significant battle or especially capture a settlement, things like that, there's going to be loot, a lot of it. So they will get their hands on that armor and weapons and so on and so forth, so they can then figure out if there's something that's clearly superior, okay, how do we make this? And I mean, this is our strength as humans, as a species. We're very good at adapting. That's what we do. We see something, or we run into problems and then we go, okay, let's figure something out. But the Vikings didn't do that for some reason in For Honor. They just, whatever. They have clearly inferior equipment. Now, I talked in a previous video about how actual historical real-world Vikings could have much better equipment and also proper armor. But in the game, just, no, they don't care whatsoever. The samurai also, in the game they have wooden armor, which apparently they didn't actually use. They had iron and steel, so that's also quite weird. And they could have taken this, the developers could have taken this a lot further and, come up with designs that, are enhanced armor, but they still have that Viking flavor to them. For example, I found one picture here. Okay, this guy has horns too, which is, and the armor is a little dubious in some ways. It looks a bit Dwemer-like almost from Skyrim, but just as an example, it looks vaguely Viking. It's mainly the beard, let's face it, but in the game, in For Honor, it's also, how do we even recognize them as vaguely Viking? It's the beards, it's the spectacle helmets, and that's pretty much it. They use axes, but otherwise they look nothing like real Vikings, so we could still recognize them as Viking even if they had better armor. And then also, if you want a historical inspiration, there's the Varangian Guard. These were men from Scandinavia who became employed by the Byzantine Emperor as elite fighting units and bodyguards, and their armor was more complete, if you will. They had splinted greaves and vambraces, and over time, of course, also the armor became more advanced. So later Varangian Guard would become somewhat similar to European knights. So for example, if you look at 14th century Varangian Guard, that's very late. At that point, arguably, there weren't Vikings anymore, but you see how things develop. And if you look at this guy, for example, and you give him a proper Viking beard and some version of a spectacle helmet, things like that, then he would still look Viking, or people would associate that style with Viking, and that would be much better armor. So there are plenty of ways to go about that and still have this kind of distinct Nordic style, but give them much better equipment because, they shouldn't be stupid, right? If they were stupid and if they would insist on their flimsy leather and fur clothing and whatnot, or even running around with a bare chest and things like that, then they would just be destroyed. If you look at how much better equipped the knights and also the samurai are, then there's just no chance. They would be steamrolled and that's it. But anyway, just, a few thoughts for amusement, and maybe, who knows, maybe some game developers listen to this and go, you know what, let's do that. That would be pretty awesome. But either way, it's just for entertainment. Thanks for watching.